Welcome back to another Union Street podcast. Today's podcast, advice on starting a podcast. Are you a podcaster? Are you thinking about starting a podcast? Well, listen to this podcast and I'll give you my advice on what I've learned from over 2 years of doing podcasts. Let's just jump into it. Tip number 1 is find your audience. Who are you talking to? Is there a target demographic that you're trying to reach? Find one person that you want to connect with and just talk to that person. Tailor your podcast to that person. Find your audience. Who are you trying to reach? Now, there's different reasons to start a podcast, but building an audience and knowing who your target listener is really important. Having a podcast will help you build credibility within your own industry and help you get your face out there, help you get your messaging out there, and help you control your own narrative and tell your story the way you want it to be told. That's one thing that you can do with a podcast. And set goals. That goes with who you want to reach. Are there end goals with your podcast? Is it to learn? Is it to share information? Is it to get bookings for your services? Whatever that is, establish goals so you have something to work towards for your podcast. So you have a why. Why are you doing this podcast? That's the first step. Find your audience, find your why, and set goals. And everything after that speaks directly to that. Podcasts are a great way to build your network. So that brings us to step number 2. Find your format and define your style. There are a lot of different podcasts out today. Hundreds, thousands of podcasts, and they're all different. This is a video podcast. I recommend video podcasts. I personally like a video component. I've been modeling my podcasts from Joe Rogan. If it's good enough for Joe Rogan, well, that's what we want to bring and deliver as far as format goes and style. Interview-based, multiple camera angles. You can bring a TV in, bring in a screen to pull up reference material that your viewer can watch. Because YouTube and Facebook they're the two biggest online video format platforms. So having your podcast have a visual element on YouTube and Facebook is really important. So defining your style, defining your show structure. Is it a guest-based interview? Is it co-host? Is it solo? Like this podcast, this particular podcast. What is that? So you have to find your format and find your style. And you want your style to reflect and appeal to your audience and your ideal listener. And your format and your style should directly play towards that, towards your why and towards the goals of the podcast. Always have those in mind whenever you're launching a podcast and doing a podcast. Have fun with your podcast and give your audience a reason to listen. Have information that people want to listen to. How long is your podcast? Is it 20 minutes? Something someone can consume in one sitting on the car ride? Is it 45 minutes? Is it an hour plus? Find how long you want to do your podcast, and that will help you shape your format. And how often you podcast. Is it a weekly podcast? Bi-weekly? Do you do multiple times a week? How often are you willing to commit to recording an episode and pressing publish? Tip number 3, tell your story. Show your personality. Do you have an online brand awareness already? Leverage your online brand awareness and personal brand, whether it's on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. Promote your podcast on your own personal brands getting started so you can help build your audience at the outset and reach your already existing audience and leverage that. You control your own story. You can control your own narrative. So put out what you want your narrative to be. You can define that. What is your podcast about? Who is it for? What can listeners expect to hear? You need a description. What is a 1 to 2 sentence description of your podcast? Go to our website, unionstreetarts.com, and go to the podcast tab where you'll find our podcast launch package, where it'll show you the breakdown of what you can expect from an idea of, I want to start this podcast, to 30 episodes, and a year later, we can help manage, produce, and launch your podcast. So check us out on unionstreetarts.com/podcasts. At Union Street Arts, we have a podcast launch package that provides the infrastructure, the training, and the know-how to launch your own podcast. We take care of all the technical aspects so you can focus on what matters most, the content. We'll help you from start to finish, from equipment selection through getting your first 4 podcast episodes up and public. We can do that in our podcast launch package. Our startup and coaching guide. Our producers will help you develop your concept, branding, and establish your format, themes, goals, and desired outcomes for your podcast. We'll also help you with hosting service setup, production schedule, and publishing schedule. Get you the infrastructure of how this podcast will go from production to publishing. Cover art, design, and theme music. You can stand out with your podcast from your branding with custom artwork and the music to go with your show. That's something that we can help craft, create, and produce to help you stand out and to help your branding of your podcast get out there and look the best it can look. A 60-second teaser episode. Build hype before the show goes live. Combining different shots of the first 4 episodes before they go live and editing them into a highlight reel into a 60-second teaser that you can promote as a channel teaser to build hype before the show goes out. And that will help you launch this podcast off the ground, build interest, and let people know, hey, this is what's coming. This is what you can expect from this podcast when we have our format, our schedule, and our themes and everything figured out and ready to rock and roll. We also do custom intro and outros. Start your podcast and end your podcast the same way with a motif to bring the viewer in and to have them remember, okay, the show's started. Okay, the show is ending. And create consistency. So remember, find your audience, find your niche, set your goals, and work towards that. Talk to that audience. Speak directly to them. Find your format and define your style. What's going to work best for you? What makes the most sense? What do you want your audience to come across? 3, tell your story. You can define your own story. You can tell your story. You can say, this is what I want to put out there. Now I want to talk about how you can make money with your podcast. The number one way is sponsored ads. Most top podcasts will have read-through sponsor advertisements where companies will pay you to read a description, to read their branding, to read an ad to promote their product or business or service or entity on your podcast. And this is an easy way that you can make money with your podcast through sponsored ads. The second best way to monetize your podcast is by promoting your services or products. Use your podcast to drive more sales by talking about them on your podcast. People will hear that. People will come to you and want your services because, again, you have the credibility from your podcast. They'll hear your services or your product and they want to come and support it. So you can monetize through your podcast by marketing your services or products. The third way to monetize your podcast is by selling merchandise. By developing your branding, developing your audience, you can brand merchandise and sell it to your audience and to help monetize that. Do you have a logo? Do you have a phrase? Put that on a t-shirt, a mug, stickers, any type of creative merchandising that you can do for your branding of your podcast. Sell it on merchandise. The bottom line is podcasts can be highly rewarding, but it comes with initial hard work and setup. But once you get it going with the right intentions and expectations, it can be fulfilling both emotionally, financially, and mentally. Podcasts, you can learn a whole lot, and it's for a certain demographic. And podcasts can be a marketing engine for your brand and your business. You can create blog posts from it. You can create short clips for Instagram or TikTok from your podcast. Really, there's an endless amount of content that you can create from your podcast. It's a content marketing machine. Your podcast is a content marketing machine. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching the Union Street Podcast. New episode every Friday at noon Central Standard Time. With this podcast, I'm trying to be more informational, to give more tangible resources to the audience. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, put a comment below. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Reach out to us if you have any questions, ideas. UnionStreetArts.com. See you in the next one.